Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. This week, we have an interview for you conducted by Mona with Jesse Armerding, and he is a performer with the New York City group of Stomp. There's a lot of really great things in this interview. I encourage you to check out some of the links and comment on the show notes at irenicast.com/41. And also, if you have just general feedback for the show, you can do that at irenicast.com/feedback. So without any further ado, here is Mona's interview with Jesse Armerding.
Hey everyone, this is Mona. I have a special treat for you today. We are interviewing my friend Jesse, who is a performer on the off-Broadway showing of the show Stomp. That's a lot of words, show. The Stomp, if you're not familiar with it, is like this spectacular rhythm performance, and Jesse can tell you more about it. It's been going on for many years on Broadway and other parts of the country and in the world. Do you guys tour worldwide?
Yeah. There's a cast in the UK, and then there's a touring international cast, and then there's a tour that does the States, and then I am in the show in New York, which is a sit-down show in the East Village in Manhattan, and they've been at that same theater for 20 plus years. Yeah.
Cool. And I haven't seen your particular performance, but I've seen the one in San Francisco, and it was a lot of fun. So if you ever want just a kick-ass, just fun show, that's a great one. But Jesse and I are great friends. We go way back to college, and I thought it'd be fun to have Jesse on the show and just talk about creativity, and maybe we'll get into talking about creativity and faith a little bit later, but just what it is, why it's important, why we seek to create, and what it means for our humanity, and all of the above. So, Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pardon if I sound a little hoarse. I'm a little bit sick today, but no, glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about yourself as an artist and a creative person?
A creative person. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, probably the biggest thing for me is I'm a musician. I grew up in a pretty musical family, and I started playing piano when I was about 5, and then played guitar and mandolin and a bunch of different things in middle school, and then ended up playing the drums, and that sort of became my primary instrument ever since high school. And So yeah, music was always a big deal, but then along the way I really started, I don't know, if I had to try to define myself as a creative person, or where my niche is, I've always, sounds a little corny, but always found myself at the intersection of music and story. I've always been a huge fan of what those two things have to do with each other. I got really into soundtracks when I was young, and I would even start writing out stories off of soundtracks to movies I hadn't even seen. I would sort of do the reverse process that usually happens, and ended up doing a lot of theater through high school and college, and after college even. I would do sound design, I would do band leading, I've directed shows, I've done a fair amount of acting. But yeah, I have always been involved or been drawn to shows that, they're either musical shows that are theatrical or theater shows that are very heavy on the music, and also done some small video work and stuff like that. I'm a huge fan of trailers, for instance, because they to me are kind of like music videos, but with a lot more story. You get a snippet of a story, and music tends to play a huge part in it. So I'm a huge fan of those, and would hopefully love to work more on them in the future. And so, but yeah, I've been playing music all along, and then ended up in Stomp, which has definitely put to use everything I sort of acquired in my arsenal as a musician and as a performer and as a theater artist. It's definitely requiring everything I have to to contribute to it, which is a pretty cool feeling. It's pretty great to, I think, as any sort of artist, to get trained in different ways and sort of I don't know. It can be tricky for people to find their place, and not that Stomp is my ultimate place, but it feels pretty great to, after years of doing different things, have them all be really, really applied, be in a room where it's like, okay, we need this. It's like, oh, I happen to work on that for these 3 years of my life. And then, a lot of instances of that. So I don't know how good a summary that was, but
that was fantastic
in somewhat of a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great nutshell. So what draws you to drums in particular? Like, why did out of all the instruments that you dabbled in and all the possibilities out there, like, why drums? I mean, knowing you, it's such a good fit for you.
It's funny. I've always said if I could live life over, I would play the bass, actually. Because I mean, part of the one frustration I always had with drums is usually you're sitting down, and I like to be up moving, and Stomp has definitely solved that to a certain extent because you really get to move around doing that show. What drew me to it? It's a bit embarrassing. Honestly, in middle school, I just wanted to start doing something else besides piano, and drums kind of required the least amount of work. It's like the percussion section was always the lazy members of concert band. I feel like you could just sort of slip in and like hide in the back and do it.
I thought you were gonna say you wanted to get the ladies.
See, I never got that, because to me the drummer is like always the thug oaf of the band. So like I don't know. I mean, I know there's some drummers out there who I totally get are, rock star lady killers or whatever. But I always thought that was the guitarist or the singer, or even I thought the drummer was like last in line, for that kind of stuff.
Oh, is that how it works? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of these stereotypes.
I don't know. I just, I didn't, no, the answer is no. I did not seek it out for thinking, yes, this will get me stares from women. But no, it was the easiest one to just sort of dive into. But then I don't know. But then I did end up really taking to it. It's funny you should say that though, because I've been at the same time, whereas I've really I don't know. It wasn't a very conscious choice. I just sort of did it, and it worked, and I dug it. At the same time, I'm always, like in Stomp, I miss melody quite a bit. I miss other instruments. I miss harmonics and stuff like that. And right now, I'm even trying to do some more composing and stuff that I've never done before, because as the drummer, it usually tends to be an accompanying instrument. You can't very often lead a group necessarily, because it's an additional thing to add to the music. I mean, it plays different roles, but it's tough to write material from the drums, and in that way, it can be tough to lead. Yeah.
That's interesting. But it sounds like for you, like creating is much bigger than even getting a band together. That the process of creating involves, like you said, story and theater and this kind of multiple ways of being and expressing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the music story stuff goes, that was just sort of all that's just a very God-given inclination. That wasn't anything I developed. That was just really, really naturally there. And plenty of times, I remember being at some concerts that I was really enjoying, but usually all I could think of while it was happening was, oh my God, how much better would this be if this were exploding off of some sort of story, if this was accompanying something. And that's weird to say. I mean, I like music in and of itself very much so, and I would never dare to say it needs more than it is, At the same time, that's just sort of where my spirit would go with stuff. I like, music. I forget who said it originally, but I think it was some famous director, some famous film director, said music in film tells you how to feel about the thing. The plot is happening or the characters are doing whatever, and music is going to tell you how to feel about it, or that's how it's used in film. And I guess I'm just interested in its power in that respect, for good or for bad, or manipulative or not, how that works. But yeah, I do always want it to be, I don't know, I guess the big picture matters. Setting always matters quite a bit to me, so that affects me a lot. Same time at a concert, I could go to see a band that I really like, but if the crowd is a bunch of terrible humans and the space is like, and the space doesn't feel good, even if like the AC is blasting, it's like a summer concert and you're indoors or something like that, and that isn't, in like a shoddy space or something like that, that'll affect my experience of it, So
yeah, I've been to concerts where the band's just playing their butts off, and just really and the crowd is just staring at them like they're reading a eulogy, It's like awful.
Yeah, that's come to be a significant part. Like, I will or won't go to concerts now, sometimes based on the crowd. Like, there's this band, Primus. I don't know if you remember that. They're still going, actually, but they were a bit bigger, should I say, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, or at least that's when I was really into them. They were this weird, artsy, but like heavy, God, I don't know how to describe them. It was like, the lead is this bassist named Les Claypool, who plays these big 6-string wacky basses, and they're this hard hitting, they had an edge to them, but they were really strange and weird and funky too. So it's like they definitely had this niche. So I loved Primus, and I finally got to see him. I'd never seen him before. Maybe like 5 years ago, I saw them in Boston, and oh my gosh, the crowd was just the biggest bunch of tools I've ever been around. Like, they were just terrible. They were a bunch of dude bros who were just so annoying and just ruined my experience. It was awful. And it's like, and I don't even mean like they were rowdy. They were just
boring is worse than rowdy, like a million times.
Oh, boring is well, I don't know. I would take boring over these people. Like, these people were terrible. They were so awful. And
what were they doing that was so terrible?
Like,
if they weren't boring,
just think of the most like obnoxious, annoying frat boy tool, that you've ever come across, and just multiply them and put them in a concert hall. And
I actually don't want to think about that.
Yeah, so that's what I was enduring.
It makes me wonder, though, and this is maybe its own conversation, that, and I don't know if it's just like where I'm located geographically or just the types of shows I tend to go to, but I mean, I love to dance and jive to music too, and to shows and concerts, but it seems like increasingly, this could totally be a figment of my imagination, but increasingly, crowds are less prone to like get up and dance and move around. And I wonder if it's like the pattern of us consuming just such a large amount of media where we're not required to participate besides just staring. Like, all of our participation is internal. Like, think about the hours of television and movies we all watch a week that, like, you don't get up and cheer or dance around in your living room to a movie, even if you're really enjoying it. So like, we've become really passive, like, experiencers,
Oh yeah, I mean, as far as the concert experience goes, it's pretty crazy to think we won't ever go to a concert anymore where when the lights go down, there aren't a sea of cell phones popping up, like, that's just how it is now. Whereas before, you just went and you were all just kind of there and you couldn't help but be totally present. At the same time, I think that depends on the show you go to as well.
Or people recording the show, like videotaping it.
Yeah.
Instead of actually just being there present. Like, presence is really important with art. Like, it really is. And I think we have a lot of reasons to not be present these days.
I think it's easy to, yeah, that's a really hard one. And it's like, at the risk of sounding like a pessimistic old man of a person, yeah, it's kind of, I do think it's kind of sad, and I'm guilty of it too. Like, I have to resist pulling out my phone and getting a snippet of something, like that. I will intentionally do it because I know I want to be there and actually experience it, but it's hard. It's so tempting when you have the option. In fact, something I did recently, my first, so I'm in New York now, and my first Lincoln Center show that I ever got to see, this ties in quite well, actually. When I talked about soundtracks earlier and writing stories and stuff, probably my biggest geek out of that nature was this guy named Danny Elfman, who's a composer who composed all the music for, among other things, pretty much every Tim Burton movie that ever that he ever did. So he did, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Nightmare Before Christmas was all him.
Oh, wow.
So I went to a concert that they had of all of his Tim Burton music, and he was actually there. And he's the voice of Jack Skellington as well in the soundtrack. A lot of people don't know that. So
wow.
He was there and sang that stuff with an orchestra live. So
whoa.
So I was almost crying. Like I was in heaven because this meant a lot to me. Edward Scissorhands is still my favorite soundtrack ever.
That's a great movie.
Yeah, it was so great. But I pulled out my phone and I took a 10-second video of one of the parts. I think they were like playing Batman. I knew I wanted to remember it. I needed a snippet, but I did that and then shut my phone off and then put it in my bag. It's like I did.
Which requires a level of discipline, right? Because like you want to try to like document the whole thing and.
No, but I knew, but it was so great being there and I felt it and it was really, really special to me. And thank God the discipline or the maturity level, I had enough of that to, I wanted to get a second for myself, so that I could remember being there, but then put it away because I really was loving it. And I felt like that, I would be interrupting it if I did any more than that. But
so let's talk about what creativity does for us, like what it means to be enraptured. I don't even know how to explain it. It's like one of those very hard things to explain, right? And maybe you can better than I, but what it means to be taken away by a performance or a story or by, I guess, like art as a thing itself, to be caught up in it and why. I mean, a lot of times I think we think of art as like a fringe thing to reality or a fringe to existence. But for a lot of people, it's really center. It's like the reason to live. It's the reason to keep going. And it's the reason we can commentate on like political and social realities without an authority clamping down. It is in a very real sense a form of human freedom. So yeah, what does it mean to you? Like that's what it means to me, but what does it mean to you?
As a sort of as a spectator receiving it or as the creator
both
making it?
Yeah, what does
both,
it mean for both? Yeah.
Where to begin with that?
I know it's a huge question.
No, it is. I mean, first of all, I'll be straight up honest and say I have no idea what art is or how to define it. And to be honest, I don't really care to. I feel like I can talk about the creative process and what making a thing means to me and what sharing in making a thing means, Mm-hmm. And I don't know when that becomes art or not. I really don't. But, I mean, first of all, to me, the process or getting enraptured or whatever, to me, I feel like that's much more broad than we usually allow it to be. Usually, it's funny, even at the beginning, I forget what you called me a creative person, and I kind of chuckle because there's people I know that I regard as far, far more creative than I am who don't have what's labeled in our society a creative job, and they don't do work that we've sort of labeled as art, and stuff like that. But to me, they really are. They're what I perceive to be creative, So I mean,
I guess creative's just like defined by the need to create or something, the propensity to create.
I mean something as simple as, you can get like really basic and literal and say we're all here via creating. I mean, someone had sex with someone else and made us and created us, and made us here. And it's just like, honestly, I think I heard Jeff Buckley say that in an interview like a long time ago, in his, Jeff Buckley fashion. It's just like, if you spend a night making love, that's a creative endeavor. How dare you think otherwise? Da, da, da. And I sort of laughed, but then I just thought about it. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, everything that's involved in me making a piece of me, the moves I make, the approach that I make, the choices that I make in terms of making something or being in a moment with someone, that happens there as well. You can be incredibly creative telling a story to friends, having just having a night with friends, like
making a meal or
making a meal.
Building friendships is an art form.
Building friendships is creative. You make you make choices, choice making is like a big thing in creating. It's like if you're on a path and you're making a thing, you're going to go this way or this way. If you're acting in a play, if you're a character, like what choice are you going to make in terms of how you go at this, and those choices I feel like are made all the time. And in that respect, I feel like I know a lot of people who live very, very creatively, and I mean, I aspire to be more like that. And in fact, plenty of them, I think, live far more creatively than people who produce what we call art, or put out, products or things that we can look at.
That's super interesting to think about it that way. Because I think, and if you define creativity that way, is like you have to be present with the choices that might be available to you in the moment. Like it requires a sort of attentiveness. Yeah, and I agree with you. I've met people like at the bus stop who are just like fantastically and creatively dressed. Like I've never seen anybody wearing anything remotely like that. And you can tell that that person took time to express themselves and are really excited about it. And I think that's like seeing art in our every single day-to-day experience is pretty tremendous in that way. And a lot of times, like I think in our like self-esteem culture, like creativity gets checked off on a box like as a personality trait, and I've even claimed this before.
You're a very creative person.
Like you're a special flower. You like to create pictures, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I have pictures that I've made like on my wall. I'm very proud of them. Like they're not very good, but I like them. But creativity, actually, what you're saying is like so much more profoundly bigger than that, which is.
I just think you live it a lot. I think people, at least what I think of it and where I honestly value it most, is where I see people living it. There's nothing wrong with painting those pictures, and there's nothing wrong with people producing stuff. Like it's really not, but. It's just not what I would label. I mean, put it this way: there's a lot that's being produced that I don't think is coming from that place, from that creative place, and yet it's produced, and yet it has the label on it, and yet it's sellable, and yada yada, and we need that stuff too. I just don't think, as far as creativity or witnessing it or anything like that being satisfying, I guess I'm just trying to talk about the root of it. And you and I have had conversations about, or I know you've sent me articles on the idea of flow before, and I think that very much has something to do with the creative process, just in terms of finding your way, finding your way into that state of being where creativity is flowing, or in my opinion, you're decluttering a lot of your, so that things can, so that you can play, so that things can flow out of you, so that you're not thinking so hard and picking it apart so hard. Kids are the most creative people on the planet because they don't have anything in their way. Like they're just like constantly flowing. There's like nothing. They're not analyzing anything that they're doing. They're just making it. And we have like seminars and TED Talks about how to be more like that, So I think,
we try to formalize it.
Well, we're trying to in our adult minds. It's like, geez, how do we get back to that? How do we retain that? Because I think we've, realized in some part that it's where real makings of stuff tends to happen.
Yeah, and I think the process even of judging like what counts as good creativity or bad creativity, that judging process is super dangerous to creativity itself, because if you're constantly like evaluating your own choices, like meaning like, oh, I drew this thing and I did it out of a childlike sense of wonder and flow and being present in the moment, but now that I stop and look at it, it's really bad and ugly and I am embarrassed of it, so like that process of second guessing can be, I'm not talking about if you're making moral choices that like hurt or abuse other people. I'm talking about like so many people that I know that consider themselves non-creative, and any little speck of thing they try to do toward a quote unquote creative thing, like, or decision or something that's like personally expressive, they're very harsh on themselves. I know a lot of people in my life that are like, oh, you're the creative one, I'm not. And I try to do a thing and it's just not good enough. And, isn't that we've gotten to a really weird cultural place with that, I think.
I think part of that is it's kind of gotten a bit product based, or it's kind of gotten like to do anything, it then needs to be sellable in some way, or it needs to be put out, like
it's commodified. Yeah,
it just
absolutely right.
depends on the tag that you're putting onto it. Kevin Smith has this great video where he's taking questions, and someone writes in and it's like, I want to be a filmmaker, how do I go about it? And he's like, all right, I'll tell you, get your iPhone, get a bunch of friends together, write something and go film it, and you're a filmmaker. And he's like, and I'm not kidding, I'm not joking, like, you are a filmmaker, like, you made a film. Now, you want to make a film and have people pay you for it? Okay, that's actually something different. Now that requires this and this and this and this. You want to make a film and get paid for it, but you want to make the film that you want to make and have people pay you for it? Okay, that's another tier. Like, that's another thing that we're talking about. And basically, he just is breaking down the idea of, like, any of these levels is fine, but be brutally honest about what you want out of it. I'm struggling with this. I think all creatives do, when you try to make it your job, or you try to, even if you're trying to get attention from it, if you're trying to get people to listen, or are you doing it just because you need to and it really makes you happy? I think in today's world it can be really tough to do that last one. Whenever people play me stuff that they've been working on, and I can tell they're hesitant about it, like someone's got hey, check out this new thing that I wrote, and they'll send it to me, and I know that they're not very happy with it because they'll defend it for about 5 minutes before they give it to me, and then I'll listen, and it's like, what do you think? And I'll be like, well, what do you think? Well, I think it needs this work, and I think it da-da-da-da, and it da-da-da, and they'll break it all down. I'll just be like, yep, exactly that. So it's
yeah, we are pretty harsh on ourselves. Like, I think it is important to see where you can improve. That's a really important thing. But it depends on your goals. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I long for the time, and I don't think I'm in a terrible place creatively, but oh my God, what I would pay to be my high school self when I was making movies with friends, where I had no end game in mind, other than maybe making my friends laugh and making something that I thought looked cool, Now, granted, nothing I made in high school made money, but if I could somehow stay in that state of being, making stuff, ironically, that would be a lot closer to something that people would want to see than currently, where I have to battle constantly about, like, okay, what is this going to be though? What is this going to be the end result? And what's this going to lead to? Sort of, it's kind of the perils of being an adult, and it's understandable. We need to friggin' feed ourselves and pay health insurance and stuff. But it's a funny thing for that. Yeah. So yes, I completely second what you said in terms of, it depends on what your goals are and why you want to do the thing. And I guess I would encourage all of us to let them be smaller. I mean, I don't know. You've been to New Orleans, yes? Or you haven't? I forget.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I adore that place.
Yeah.
I'll always go back when I want to. And probably the biggest thing I took away, I mean, I'd been obsessed with the music that's come out of there for a long time, but probably the biggest thing I took away from it was going down and seeing music down there and playing music down there. I don't know how it works, or I don't know what voodoo went on to create this, but it really is the big easy in that there's just no pressure in the air for it to be more than it is. Just these people are playing this music, and it's great, and it's beautiful out, and we're here listening, and maybe we're dancing, maybe we're not, maybe we're just around, whatever. But it is its own end game. There's no tension in the air of this needs to get on YouTube and get 100 million hits. Like, it is just, this moment is great, this music is good, and that's all it has to be. And so there's no pressure, and because there's no pressure, I personally think that's a huge component of why that music is what it is, and it is magical stuff. You won't hear stuff like that anywhere else in the country, and I think that's a huge part of that is somehow they've found a way for it to just be, you know. And I'm not from there. I'm sure natives could speak much more directly to it, but that was my impression, especially playing in the streets and stuff like that, you know.
That's so cool.
Just the energy of it was
that the end of it, the ends of it, like means and ends are both pointing to like the moment and just being there and being together and enjoying what's being created right in front of your eyes. And it doesn't like that is certain art forms like music are bound within time. I mean, the whole idea that you can record music and play it back later, and especially now that you can have millions of recordings at your disposal at any particular moment, and you can just call them on cue and have them with you in your pocket. Like, that's really historically new. What we have known for centuries is that music is based in time. You have to be present for it. And once it's done, it's done. It's not like a piece of visual art that you can always see, even though that has like a space bound being bound in a space or a certain geographic location. But music has this tremendous capacity to remind us to be in the moment because it itself is fixed in the moment, which is super interesting. What I hear you saying earlier though is like you were kind of making me think about, you know, that question of goals and how a lot of times we see like goals as a hierarchy. Like first, you know, level 1, you're in your room playing music for yourself. Level 2, you're out at a club with a cover band playing music for yourself, playing music for like with your friends. Level 3, you're writing your own music and performing it. Level 4, you're trying to get a recording deal. You know, just kind of like goes up and up and up till you get to the quote unquote top. But thinking about it, right? That's how we think about it.
I don't know where that got built. You know, it's like some weird version of like a American music, American dream or something, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's funny. That's like, get to just the idea of like getting to the top. Like
but those are all equally valid goals.
Oh,
like
sure.
what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me that, or just kind of like listening to that, it reminds me that every single one of those goals starts with playing for yourself in your room stuff that you like and you enjoy and finding ultimate joy before any of that other stuff comes into existence or before you chase anything else. You do it because you find joy in it and it brings you into the present moment and you feel a sort of connection to something greater than yourself or whatever it happens to do for you. But you can never get away from that place of playing. Just play, like human play.
Oh, you can, but you'll be miserable.
Right.
I think it happens.
It turns into something else once you get away from play.
It's just gonna be hollow. Any of those things. I mean, it's funny. I've thought a lot about this idea, and I'm, you know, it's sort of. I forget if I said this to you at some point or another friend, but I was talking about, you know, creative aspirations or endeavors, and I think I said like I don't just want to take someone to Rome on our honeymoon. You know, I want to be with someone that I would want to take to Rome, and for like I want to be with someone where I would be happy to just be with them. I don't know if I'm explaining this quite right, but it's like basically if you don't, you know, how good is going to visit Rome with the person that you aren't just excited to be around? So, you know, like it's sort of a hollow. You're sharing this big amazing thing in this sort of hollow relationship or something like that. Whereas I'm now aspiring in many ways just to find the person or the thing and let that be the starting point. Like that can be the hardest thing, you know, finding, and that's, you know, applying this to music, let's say, just for an example, I think that would be, for instance, writing stuff that you really genuinely do like, or finding collaborators, finding a band where when you guys are just playing in a basement or making the stuff late at night, you really feel that satisfaction. Then going and recording something and playing at the place and doing whatever will be amazing and will be really cool. But aspiring to just play the Superdome or just tour this place or get a record deal, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's just really silly when you stop and think about it. It's like, I got a record deal. It's like, what if it's music that you hate? Like, you got a record deal for this music that you hate and with a band that you cannot stand and don't get along with.
It happens really often.
And that happens all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
how good is a record deal if the heart of the thing is like that, you know? Like, that's not worth anything except to other people seeing you and thinking you're the shit, you know, or whatever, or thinking you're some sort of rock star, you know?
Well, it's such a bigger conversation about our a culture of commodification that we just have these kind of
celebrity and rock
celebrity,
stardom,
yeah, and we have these ideas of structure that if we reach a certain level that we'll be happy with it, but really that's totally and completely missing the point. And I think of, like, for example, like basketball players, like if you don't always enjoy the pickup game, even if you make it to the NBA, you could be totally miserable in that vocation, even if you have all that talent and all that skill. Like, if you don't actually enjoy it, and I think about too, like, the structure that's implicit in that. Like, a lot of times I think because of our culture that's geared toward commodification and making money, and our education systems that have adopted a very standardized, actually, I think Obama just today signed No Child Left Behind out.
I saw that.
Which is interesting. But No Child Left Behind and some of these governmental policies have caused our education system to become so standardized that they really have like a mechanization of learning. And so we actually are taught throughout our lives to anticipate these very like solid sorts of categories and structures, so that deviating outside of them, like the idea of making up your own game or your new genre of music or a new type of instrument or a new way to play or recreate with your friends, like making up your own structures is pretty it's not even comprehensible to a lot of people. And so we do have like it takes a tremendous amount of energy to stop coloring inside the lines, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how you grow up, you know? Yeah, and it depends on your school. I think it depends on your family a lot, you know? I think it depends on your parents. I think it depends how you're treated when you're playing growing up, you know, and how that's dealt with. I mean, I do wish I'm not an educator, so I know very little about this, but I have always wished that there's a bit more emphasis on noticing kids' specific inclinations, like where is their energy going to? And I'm in no way talking about throwing out discipline or throwing out basic things that we need to learn to be, you know, humans in the world today. But I wish there was more noticing on, okay, this kid is sucking in this area and that's important. We need to work on it. But man, he is always inclined to whatever. He's always drawing in the back, or you see him after school, he's always working on this thing with his friends. Like, to notice those inclinations and those passions, you know, it's like, it's always better to work within a passion, you know, to get better at something and push through. It'd be really cool if school systems had a way to support that. Like, should they notice it? It's like, okay, you're working on that. I mean, God, like what I would have done and don't get me wrong, I actually had some really great teachers in high school who are wonderful, but to think if they had sort of noticed my music storyness and said, actually, Jesse, for this quarter, we're going to give you this assignment. Like, we want you to make this. We want you to make a theater show that's involving this and this and this, and you can use these students to do whatever. Oh my God, I would have been in heaven making a thing, like being productive
and learning a ton,
you know, and not consuming, you know. I mean, you and I were talking about Rob Bell a little bit and his ideas. About
I want to talk about that
whatnot.
conversation in a sec.
I mean,
before we go there, I want to mention a really great book that was really helpful for me along these exact same lines that you're talking about, and it uses a lot of case studies. It's called Finding Your Element, by Ken Robinson. And it talks about all these stories of famous people, how in their childhood they exhibited some sort of special talent, and they had people in their life to say, you are good at that, we're going to help you foster that. and to see where they went from there. Like famous choreographers and comedians and writers. It's a really great book. Sometimes these books come across like very self-helpy, like you're special and everyone's special. No, it's really about the quest of like, how do we find what makes us tick and do that thing well, So anyway, but yeah, I totally want to talk about faith because that's come up a lot in our conversations, just the frustration of being a person of faith and feeling that a lot of faith communities clamp down on creativity and creative expression and only allow a very narrow range, or they lose their sense of humor. And like that's really significant for a lot of us. It's like hard to stay in faith community because no one can laugh about anything. But you and I recently were talking about a specific conversation between Rob Bell and who was it?
Rob Bell is a guest on Pete Holmes's podcast.
This is an episode from 2013. And we'll post it on the show notes so you can go find it. It's awesome. And the podcast is called
You Made It Weird.
You Made It Weird.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Pete Holmes is great. I think he's really funny, and I think he has some interesting things to say. I'm sure he would piss off a lot of Christians, but
well, he's a self-professing Christian person, right? As far as I could tell from this conversation, or a person of faith.
I mean, I like him because, or at least I guess I resonate with him because I think it sounds like he'll forever be interested in the conversation, and he's interested in, and he's not anti the church, and he has not thrown out the baby with the bathwater. In fact, he has a phrase about that phrase that, and I forget what it is and I'll misquote it, but he's not a hater, he's interested, but he's had his own experiences with the church, I think, and going to a Christian school. I, in fact, years ago went and saw the Bourne Ultimatum with him. My older brother was in school at the same time that he was, and we all happened to be in New York at the same time. And it's funny to have seen him going and doing this now, and he's like killing it. But yeah, so he had Rob Bell on, which was great because Pete isn't intimidated by many people, and Rob Bell can seem to talk to almost anybody as well, from where he's at. He's not an anxious guy, I personally like hearing him talk, even though I don't, I'm not in the same class as him, I think, in terms of a person of faith. But I mean, I was going to bring him up just because I like his focus, I guess. He's interested, it seems like, in like real big problems of the world, and he's interested in bearing good fruit in terms of relationships, in terms of being creative and actually making things. I think he's more interested in contributing than he is making sure to not do anything wrong, Yeah,
that's a pretty big distinction.
For me, that resonated pretty hard because I'll try to say this quickly. As far as the creative process goes, that's the closest thing, to be honest, that I have currently to a God or a faith, and that's just by me living my life. Is this creative process that I feel like I get in touch with, when I'm lucky. I feel like I see throughout the planet simply by us having metaphors that we say ebb and flow when it applies to life, or we talk about a downward spiral, which is a physical thing with water and other objects like that, and yet we compare it to something that happens to our lives. Like the fact that those things even exist to me, or we say branch out, like referring to a tree going a certain way, or we talk about roots of plants, and yet we're talking about things in our lives, I feel, to me, all those things, the fact that those things exist like that, to me, I perceive those as a creative stamp. To me, that points towards a creator. To me, that's me witnessing a similar creative process in like all facets of life. When you look hard enough, it's there in every single facet. And so to me, that's all pointing to something, to some sort of focal creating or creator. And so that's why I guess I feel okay putting, at least whatever faith I have in believing that making things and creating and being active in that way is a good thing, because it does feel, God, in some vague hippie way, it feels ordained, and it feels like it's part of it feels like it's part of the bigger picture, and it feels like we're all aiming, that all these things are somehow aiming towards the same thing or getting in sync with this ultimate creator.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. And I don't mean to try to put you in some sort of theological box, but there is a strong Christian tradition around the concept of Imago Dei that we've talked about in other shows. Imago Dei is Latin for image of God. And a lot of people focus on like, you have God's image or God's essence, and there's a lot of debates around that, but people forget about the being made part, that the whole point is that if you worship a God that, or not even worship a God, if you kind of believe in or kind of try to be tapped into a God that values making and being together, then it does like inspire us to live more fully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Rob Bell is definitely someone who will argue for living a full, thriving life. Now, what exactly that looks like is where you get in, I'm sure you get into tons of fun debating and arguing and everything. And I get, and at the same time, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater the other way either. I'm someone who does believe in the value of discipline and thinks there is a place for structure, but I think, I do think that needs to be balanced with other things. And I don't think it's the ultimate point. I think those things are there. Like, here's a good musical parallel. I can do exercises on the drums. I can practice for hours a day, these specific exercises that are apparently there to build up my muscles and build up my rhythmic sensibility and ability to play or whatever. But we've all been to those shows where it feels like, or seen that video where it feels like someone is just playing their exercises for us. And it's like, look, I'm doing it. Look, I'm doing it right. Look how many hours I put in. Look at the thing I did. And you want to say to them, you're like, okay, I don't really care. Like, that doesn't matter to me. Like, that's not the point. These things are tools, and tools are used to make something. So don't make the tool. And this happens a lot. And it's why I like the music and art that I like is when I'm a huge Tom Waits fan, and a lot of people hate, how can you like Tom Waits? He sings terribly and the music sounds like this and da-da-da-da-da. I like it because I feel a lot of soul in it, and I don't care as much. It's like, yes, you're right. This thing isn't correct by some tutelage that you got, yada, yada, yada. But that tutelage is only so good if it helps you make the thing that moves us, that tells a story, or that makes us dance, or that we just find beautiful, like this isn't, you're not in school anymore. You're not going to get an A on this for playing this thing perfectly in public. That's not the point. That's not the point. And I think it gets made the point quite a bit. And so for me, I started practicing differently as the years went on. I still practice technically, that's really important, but that for me very much needs to be combined with, how do I practice playing? How do I practice getting into a space where I really am flowing, And that's a much weirder thing. I think it's easy to be a fundamentalist in a lot of ways because of that, because it's easy. It is easy to like, I'm going to do these exercises for this long that are like this, da-da-da-da-da, and that's it, But then you're not having to like do anything with your soul, You're just.
So why is the soul engagement important? And sure, there are types of art that have less soul necessary, I suppose you could say. And, I've been thinking about this whole conversation back to a documentary I watched about Picasso. And Picasso, many people don't know, like people just know like the misshapen sort of weird heads with like two eyes on one side of the face, right? Most people don't know that Picasso, by like the time he reached 18, had mastered figurative art and could paint like Titian or Michelangelo. I mean, he could paint literally anything in a completely realistic manner. He had mastered it. So what he did is he went through this process of forgetting all that he had learned.
Yeah.
And he specifically wanted to be in a childlike state, exactly what you were talking about before. And what emerged from that process of learning how to relearning how to be like a child was that he created this new form of art called Cubism that ended up determining and like decimating in a good way the whole art world of the 20th century, because Cubism allowed him to portray multiple perspectives at once, like multiple angles. It's like if three people saw the same thing and those three visions of the same reality were converged into the same vision point. And so basically Picasso, by forgetting everything he learned, invented something completely and utterly new that no one had really understood or seen before. And it came across as really grotesque and gross and ugly to a lot of people. Like people were actually offended at his sensibilities. How could you make something that ugly? But they didn't understand the soul of where he was going with it or what he was trying to accomplish and how significant it was that he was trying to get back to a pre-structural time, knowing that you never can do that. So I think flow and soul, again, to some people are going to be much more important than like for example, somebody who's like playing a Tom Waits style of like blues or soul music is going to be a lot more into the feeling of the moment than someone who's trying to play a really technical form of modern jazz, just as a drastic example. But soul and flow come into all forms of art and music at some point, right? So
yeah, for sure. And it depends on, it's like no one's getting sued for having the taste that they have either. It's like those people, it was within their right to hate Picasso. It's like it's a free, or at least we're in a free country now, apparently.
But Picasso, but have you ever seen his guitar player, his blue period? I mean, when I saw that in person, that painting for the first time, I seriously cried. Like it was, he emotes something through all of the breaking of all those rules that gets us something super humanly visceral. And it reminded me of times of deep sadness because it carries that like spirit of it, So yeah, like what is soul? Like what is it? I don't even know.
Jeez, that's a good question. I don't know that I'm deep enough for that. I don't know. It's tapping into mystery stuff, and I'm almost fine just calling it that. I was going to say when you were talking about Picasso, I was thinking, well, yeah, he got back to searching and he got back to wandering and wondering. One of my favorite drummers ever just put out this sort of mini memoir book. His name's Billy Martin, and he put out this book called Wandering and talked a lot about and this guy is just wildly creative. He's such an amazing guy, and talked about how for him walking in the woods was the best thing he could ever do. He got to this state of wandering and looking and exploring, and for him getting in that state of being was very, very nurturing to him, making stuff, and that's some childlike stuff. And I don't know, it's like to wander, you have to be in the unknown a little bit. There has to be some mystery there, you have to be, you could argue that like any people breaking any grounds, or anyone who's ever done something similar to Picasso in that way, I'm fine with someone speculating that is somehow a search for God, that is this exploring, wandering, searching, creative expression, that is searching for the source, that is constantly searching for the source. And so many great artists will tell you how they're never there, how they will never be finished, how they'll never do their best work, like many people say that who have no faith, as we would label it. Trey Anastasio, the guitarist of Fish, talks about this stuff all the time. And I don't know what he thinks about God, but he absolutely believes in a greater creative force, like very, very deeply. And he will like testify to that process, to that searching and that wandering and that getting in touch with mystery, So I mean, why it matters, I think we're hardwired to always be going at it, to be honest. I think it's some part of this weird human experience.
Well, yeah, the meaning of life, like if it's not mysterious and larger than us, then a lot of us would be like, well, what's the point? Like, I want to believe in a wonderful, mysterious world that I don't know all of it, because that means that I haven't figured it all out, and there's always somewhere more to go. Like, I think, I don't know, it's easy to feel really claustrophobic without that hope.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, part of being present, I think, is understanding that life's a process. And I certainly struggle with this all the time. I struggle with it before every single show I do. I try to get myself to a place of just being there and not thinking about the end of the show, and not having my mind be 2 hours ahead of me, or having my mind be 20 steps ahead. It's probably the hardest thing to do as an adult, I feel like. But, it's a parallel to, that really is how life is. Yeah, there are checkpoints, and there's times where we finish things and move on. But it's kind of one big process, So in that instance, yeah, it's like process. It's never ending and is always heading somewhere,
Yeah, and we blink and we miss life, if our mind's always on the next thing. We're not really enjoying the moment. I mean, that sounds like a dumb thing to say maybe, but I mean it like in a really visceral sense. Most of us haven't mastered that, being present to ourselves and to others.
I think it's really hard. And I think it's scary too. I think it can be like very insecure, It's like you're not, because you're mentally trying to prep for, what's coming next, and yet you're not fully there. No, it's a hard.
Yeah, because wandering without a destination, that is very scary. Like, not even getting off the beaten path, like not having a path, just wandering, and like trusting your instincts that you'll be able to get back home. But that's not the point. The point is to literally find something unexplored and something that's new and meaningful to you. Yeah. But that's really cool. One of my favorite feminist philosophers, and who I think is one of the most creative scholars who's ever lived, is Mary Daly. And she, in her philosophical autobiography, she calls it, she's constantly, like, in her work, unfortunately she's passed away, but in her work she's constantly making up new words and just playing with words and just laugh out loud playing with words. But she talks about the importance of wanderlust and wonderlust together. It's going beyond, she calls it spiraling beyond the galaxies of what we've known. Even for her, like, that meant spiraling beyond the power structures of what we know to find something more life-giving and creative.
Yeah.
So, Jesse, this has been such a good conversation. It's kind of done my heart good.
Yay!
Yay!
I'm all about that. Oh my gosh, living in New York will make you pay attention to things that nurture you and things that don't. So I'm glad this was one of those things.
Yeah, you got your tree on your block that you go visit.
I got my West Village. I got my Tempur-Pedic bed with like a little tent I've built over it. I've got my tea mug. Yeah, you sort of you learn. Yeah, you're just very intentional about taking care. Yeah.
Well, cultivating that environment that creativity needs to function and flourish, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I haven't been creative at all since I've been here. I've just sort of been hanging on. I mean, I have, but at such an extreme rate with this show that I've just sort of been hanging on for dear life in general.
Yeah, I know that show keeps you real busy, huh?
Yeah. It's a lot. It's tiring in ways that I did not expect. Yeah.
As is any great endeavor in life, I suppose.
True that.
Awesome. Well, it has been so good to talk to you and have you on the show, and maybe we can have you on again sometime. And
yeah, happy to.
People should go see your show. Where can they see it? What theater are you at?
So it's at the Orpheum Theater in the East Village of New York City. The show I'm in is, we're just there. We're just there constantly. There's 8 shows a week. You can just come. But the U.S. tour of Stomp will be going out this coming January. And most of the dates are up on the Stomp website. Right now, it's going to be all around the country from January until May. So if you're elsewhere in the country, you can probably catch a show of them there.
And if you like loud noises and people banging on trash cans and stomping their feet and clapping their hands, then this is your jam. It's a lot of fun.
It's a cool show. Yeah, it's very special. And it's not always loud, actually. A common misconception. There are loud parts for sure, but but it runs the gamut. It's very musical. It's very funny. It's very theatrical. I definitely recommend it, and that's not just because I'm in it. I think it's a great thing.
Nice. Very cool. Well, way to be proud of your work, and good luck to you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. And our audience, thank you for listening, and we will be back next week. Have a great day.